Hello and very warm welcome to all of you in this edition of Public Forum. I'm Anurag Punetha with you. Today we are going to talk about the new dynamics that is going to take place in Afghanistan. As we know that the Taliban and US are in talks since last couple of months, the truce between the two warring factions has been seen with a lot of suspicion by Pakistan as well. As US is quite committed to come out from Afghanistan, as Trump had promised his electorate 4 years back of the complete withdrawal of the US Army from Afghanistan. This has created a unique situation for many players in Afghanistan like Iran, Pakistan, China and Russia to play accordingly to their own benefit. Seeing the Taliban getting ready to enter into the political spectrum of Afghanistan, Pakistan's ISI is not entirely happy. They want complete domination in Afghanistan, and in fact, seeing the Afghanistan president, Mr. Ghani's propensity to have a cordial relation with India and US, and that has also not been liked by the Islamabad as well. And this has prompted them to think beyond Taliban. Top sources within Afghanistan intelligence have revealed that the Pakistan ISI wants another armed group ready to replace the Taliban in case the intra-Afghan talks succeed under US pressure. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani also raised this issue with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi a couple of days ago. The same was also discussed in the meeting with Indian Ambassador to Afghanistan, Mr. Vinay Kumar, and Afghan National Security Advisor, Mr. Hamidullah Mohid. In fact, some believe that this may be a reason and that the potential increase, probably if it happens, in terrorism in the Kashmir Valley in coming months, if US comes out from Afghanistan and Taliban enters into the political spectrum, and that, I mean, the hardliners will probably shift their target from Afghanistan to the Kashmir once the US-Taliban peace deal would materialize. So we are going to find out this possibility and then what would impact it would have on the region in this edition of Public Forum. And joining me for the discussion, Professor Sreeram Chaulia, international expert and diplomacy expert as well. Very warm welcome on the show, Professor Chaulia. Your first comment, I mean, how do you see this news? Though this has been in the domain since last almost 2 years, but this now has gaining ground. Do you see the possibility that the Taliban would be replaced eventually by let's say, ISI, or would it be possible, easy for the Pakistan as well?
Well, Anurag, the ISIS Khorasan, as they call it, covering Afghanistan and surrounding areas, was announced around 2015. No, that was at the time when the real ISIS in Syria had the so-called caliphate, and in parts of Iraq under Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. But eventually, and initially it looked like it had nothing to do with the Pakistani state. Initially, it looked like some of the splinter factions of the Taliban, the Afghan Taliban, and also the what is called the Pakistani Taliban, TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. Some of those groups which broke away from the main Talibans joined hands across the Durand line, especially in the eastern provinces of Afghanistan, like Nangarhar, Kunar, Khost, and so on, and announced their allegiance to the main ISIS. And then the main ISIS, which at the time had a grand ambition that from Damascus or from Baghdad, they are going to recreate the old Islamic Caliphate or the empire. They said that now this is our province. But now there are interesting testimony. You mentioned intelligence agencies and Afghan sources. It is indeed quite troublesome. People say that over time, the ISI, the Pakistani intelligence agency, infiltrated this ISIS Khorasan and gradually have now started channeling funds to them too. And there is a figure who has given a public account of this. His name is Abdul Rahim Muslim Dost. Now, this man was one of the so-called founders of this ISIS Khorasan. And he says that initially it was purely based on jihadists.
Abdul Rashid Dostum of the Eastwhile Mujahideen faction era who fought against Russians?
Not Dostum, not Dostum. Dostum was Uzbek. This man, Abdul Rahim Muslim Dost, he is actually a Pashtun who was initially allied with one of the Taliban factions. He broke away, and he says he's one of the founders of this ISIS in Khorasan, including Afghanistan. And he has said that initially it was based purely on the faith in the idea of a global Islamic empire. But over time, he says that he quit it now. He has gone public, even in the New York Times, etc. He has given interviews saying, I am no longer with ISIS Khorasan because the Pakistani agencies have fully infiltrated and have taken over it and are now using it because they want to push the insurgency inside Pakistan across the border away from them. And they also, like you said, the Afghan sources also say this, that the Pakistani game plan now is to have another force under its control so that they can continue to have the so-called strategic depth in Afghanistan, which they believe is necessary in the event of war with India. So the ISIS has become a menace, as you're right, that they have started, carrying out some very gruesome attacks. Only recently, there was a massive massacre of Sikh minorities in a Gurdwara in Kabul that was claimed by ISIS Khorasan. Earlier, they had also killed Hindus and Sikhs in Jalalabad in the east, and they have targeted Hazaras, the Shia community, very, very viciously across Afghanistan. So they try to distinguish themselves from the Taliban, saying that our agenda is more hardline and is based purely on religious hatred and sectarian hatred. Taliban was more like ethnic, Pashtun nationalism and all. But if you see the lines are getting blurred, and if the ISI from Rawalpindi is indeed controlling the ISIS Khorasan, as it seems like, at least some parts of it, then you can imagine that this is a long-term game plan. ISIS is not going to disappear from the Afghanistan even after this peace process carries out. They will continue fighting, like you said. They will going to attract all the disgruntled elements of Taliban factions who are not happy with the peace agreement with the US or with Kabul, the Afghan government, and say these are infidel regimes. Until and unless the Sunnah and Sharia reign supreme in this entire region of Khorasan, we'll continue fighting. So this is a transnational jihadist force, but looks like increasingly has got a state hand behind it. And people need to actually uncover this more, because the ISI is a master at doing this. They try to divide because now they are not sure they can control the Taliban once the Taliban have an agreement and come into power in Kabul. And the Taliban may become more independent
even
from
if we believe,
Professor
Chaulia, that some disgruntled elements within the Taliban, go away and form their own organization, would ISI be able to support them so effectively to fight against Taliban in Afghanistan, let's say, if the situation arises? Because we know them for quite sure that such a mighty nation like US could not defeat Taliban for 18 years. So would Taliban be ineffective against ISIL, if we say that, if the war happens between the two factions?
Well, ISIS Khorasan is not so strong, Anurag. I mean, look, its major reach is in the eastern provinces, the ones I mentioned, bordering Pakistan. So south of Afghanistan, west of Afghanistan, the northern provinces, ISIS, sometimes you hear some renegade Taliban factions adopting the ISIS slogan and motto and the black flag and suddenly carrying out attacks. But I don't think it is able to match Taliban in overall, fighting power or strength also. Most of the intelligence agencies say there are only 2 to 2,500 ISIS fighters in Afghanistan right now, and maybe a few thousand on the other side in Pakistan. So that way, it's not a giant fighting force. But what Pakistan is intended to do, I think, is to keep the pot boiling. In other words, even if there is a peace settlement, even if there is a power sharing agreement, let us say, there will be no post-conflict. We will not move towards a full peace, because as long as the pot is boiling, as long as Afghan state is weak, if the Pakistan will be happy. They will not try to overthrow the regime in Kabul. But what they will do is they'll carve out their own, what we call the strategic depth in many provinces, especially adjoining Pakistan, and say, now, we got a greater Pakistan and these regions anyway belong to us. There is an old dispute because there are Pashtuns on both sides. And many of them do not accept the validity of the Durand line, which divides Afghanistan and Pakistan. So Pakistanis are always wary of that sentiment, and they try to control that. So they will look for, using elements like ISIS, or there is also so-called Al-Qaeda in Indian subcontinent, AQIS. That is another group. Now, it seems on paper that these groups are all non-state actors. But like we discussed, it is murky. It is really murky. And if you look deep beneath it, the intelligence we need, get down to the ground and see there are tribal allegiances across these groups. If Taliban and ISIS are actually enemies, you will sometimes find they're also fighting together against the Afghan state. In other places, their commanders are fighting. So it has become very complex and multi-sided, and that suits the Pakistani. They don't want a single source of authority or militancy in the entire region. They want to divide and have 4 or 5. So if one goes out of control, they can use the other. If two go out of control, they can balance them with the other. So it's a kind of a puppet. Can we say that they want to play a puppet regime game.
Okay. So can we say that properly the desperation of US to get out of from Afghanistan has squeezed the pitch for a country like US and India and has tilted the entire balance in favor of Pakistan, if we say that, because the anti-US forces like Pakistan, Iran and China and probably Russia are now gaining ground, and this will be not a happy news for India.
Yeah, you're right. In fact, to start with India, which is a main concern for us, Anurag, the UN reports have shown that captured ISIS Khorasan fighters include Indian citizens. There have been, in fact, quite a few have been named from districts of, especially North Kerala. Quite a few youth misguided by ulama or by transnational propaganda channels and recruitment through the Middle East have gone to fight there. And, Kasargod, Kozhikode, Kannur, these are the districts of Kerala from which a lot of our misguided youth have gone. So there may be dozens of them.
In fact, NIA recently confirmed that Indian national has carried out suicide attack in the central prison in Nangarhar region, Nangarhar province in Afghanistan. Three Indians have been killed in that.
Yes, that's right. And during the prison break of ISIS, apparently they were involved. And some of them, are also said to have been involved in the massacre of Sikhs. So imagine Indian Muslims from Kerala going and killing Sikh minorities in Afghanistan. So you see how much the ideology of hatred and jihad has spread. So it is a matter of concern. Our National Investigative Agency, NIA, has been highly, conscious of this pipeline where Malayalis go and, via the Dubai or through Turkey, enter Syria and Iraq, and then they cross over and finally reach Afghanistan, Pakistan to fight there. So this is indeed a matter of concern. Likewise, you said, like for all the regional countries, you see the map of this ISIS Khorasan. Of course, right now it's a very small thing, but at some point they had a grandiose claims. They thought the whole of Iran, which is a Shia land, and they want to decimate it and to take it over. The whole of Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmen, all those, the whole of India, the whole of Pakistan, all of it is going to be part of Khorasan. That's what they wanted. So there are these, the belief in recreating the old caliphate or the global Islamist empire. So that is a dangerous idea. It attracts some misguided youth, some youth who are alienated in all this region, even Russians for that matter, Anurag. There are a lot of people who, after the war in Chechnya got finished, in Russia and Dagestan, these are the small Islamist, separatist enclaves inside Russia. They came to Afghanistan and they are now often found to be part of these ISIS groups. So this is, this could become a magnet. So once the US withdraws, and right now Trump has already reduced from 12,000 to 8,000. He's saying by the time of election in November in the US, he wants it down to 4,000 to 5,000 only. So it is quite clear that they are getting out of the way. So it is going to be like, the problem is being left in its place. There could be local terrorist groups or transnational or global ones, and together they are combining. There is a state hand, like we just mentioned, this one rogue actor in our neighborhood, which continues to fuel these flames. So with that kind of financing, if not a global attack on the US or in Europe, they can carry out attacks in the Indian subcontinent, and we have seen ISIS also, a so-called ISIS branch, carry out attack in Bangladesh. So there are such threats.
Okay, these are the concerns. These are the concerns. But can we say, Professor Chaulia, that we may call President Donald J. Trump as temperamental, and probably he promised his electorate the complete withdrawal from Afghanistan. So that may be his electoral promise. So probably he's doing it. But can we say that Afghanistan has gone out from US interest of things? I'm talking about the Pentagon. I'm talking about the US security establishment. Have they started thinking that Afghanistan is a gone case? We should get out from that place.
Yeah, I think there is a war weariness across the board in the US, Anurag. I mean, even
Okay.
Joe Biden, the candidate opposing Trump in the presidential election, has not been particularly, keen on his manifesto. He's not talking up remaining in Afghanistan because it's the longest war for the US.
Yeah.
They came in 2001 after
Hmm.
the September 11 attacks. It's almost 20 years now, and they got nothing. I mean, of course, there is a state in Kabul, but it does not have much control over the whole country and is a weak
Hmm.
state. And the same old actors, Pakistan and its proxies, be it Taliban or ISIS or Al Qaeda, they are wreaking havoc there.
Hmm.
So, in that sense, it's a defeat for the US. So, I think they have acknowledged it because the domestic public is not interested. If there is an attack on the US homeland,
Hmm.
like 2001 September 11,
Hmm.
if there is an attack on a major on the US, military or civilian facility or an embassy or something, then they will take it personally. Otherwise they say this is no longer our war.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think they are just dropping it, and cutting their losses and running away. So I think it's incumbent on the regional powers really to do whatever we can to stabilize, because the US, I don't think, is dependable. They don't have the will. They have the capacity to keep on maintaining a long military presence,
Hmm.
but the will is completely sapped out.
Okay, and what about this possibility of this US-Taliban peace deal? Though there have been some hiccups initially, are you of the opinion that this would materialize eventually?
See, what is interesting, Anurag, is as you said, it's been many years, 2 to 3 years, they had been negotiating it. They signed it early 2020.
Hmm.
Some part of the deal had to do with the prisoner exchange between the Afghan government and Taliban, and that had held up things. What is interesting is, despite the tremendous violence, almost on daily basis, some bomb is going off somewhere, some gunfight is erupting somewhere. There's like constant, at a insurgency. The fighting is going on endless. The Afghan National Army and security forces are losing record numbers of their personnel,
Hmm.
but and civilians are also dying in large numbers. There's a spike in violence, but in spite of that,
Hmm.
the Trump, I think, for political reasons, has not called off, completely. He initially delayed it for some time because the US soldier was killed, but then he again came back to it. It is a need for him. And I think the Taliban sense that weakness in the US system, that wariness that I talked about. Taliban, for them, it is their land. They will always be there. While the Americans are foreigners, so once they are tired, they'll pack up their bags and leave. So the geographical, limitation is there. For, as Trump says, this is 7,000 miles away. What can we do there? But one thing I must say, Anurag, like
Hmm.
you said, Pentagon and State Department, there are those who will say that we must have at least a minimal footprint there. We
Yeah.
should not go down to zero. And the reason is these same groups we just mentioned, ISIS, Al Qaeda in Indian Peninsula,
Hmm.
Haqqani network, which is directly aligned with the ISI. But now it is more interesting because one of the so-called new emirs of the ISIS Khorasan is a member of Haqqani network. It has just been revealed. So, in other words, the same nexus of evil forces is still there. So, I think the US will try and maintain at least some kind of aerial attack and drone reconnaissance and missile strike capabilities. They may not be. I mean, they're more and more disengaged from ground operations. But if it is a transnational or sounds like a global threat, or which will go beyond. In fact, Dr. Jaishankar, our foreign minister, just had a conversation with Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State,
Hmm.
where they discussed Afghanistan specifically. And
Yeah.
this is where, some of these so-called post-Taliban groups or anti-Taliban jihadist groups, these will be in the radar. Even
Hmm.
Russia is worried about them. It has been worried about them for a few years because they may go back to Chechnya and
Hmm.
restart, like we are worried about Kashmir. So I think it is a powder keg,
Hmm.
and the US will look to have, especially if Biden wins. I think
Yeah.
there will be
Yeah.
a push to at least have a few hundred, and also an ability to launch quick raids and quick, move, swoop in, attack, and then leave. Even if they don't have permanent bases there, and that is where cooperation with India, our military interoperability is increasing with the US. We have got more and gotten closer with them, not only because of the China factor, but
Hmm.
because of this, unresolved crisis flashpoint of Afghanistan also. So I think we can expect there will be some US presence. It will not be enough to prevent a kind of a ground offensive.
Okay, but
by
we
Taliban
can
or by
understand the game
any of
plan
these
of
groups, but
ISI.
it will
Probably we
be
can
holding
understand
them in check.
the war weariness of the US as well. What how do you foresee the situation in this part of the region? Probably will Taliban, I mean, who is quite interested in entering this political spectrum of Afghanistan, will they let ISIS dominate or I mean take some part of Afghanistan, or will the war create within these groups?
Well, a lot depends on the type of governance mechanisms that come up, Anurag. I mean, whenever there is a power sharing agreement for so-called peace deal, people how they react and respond ultimately depend on whether the improved governance comes. That is the so-called peace dividend. If that is not there, and if the Afghan state has for a long time been accused of corruption and ineptitude and bureaucracy. And Taliban they are not necessarily very corrupt, but they are very hardline, and they impose strict restrictions on personal freedoms in the name of Islamic rules and Sharia. So if the people are disgruntled, then these groups like ISIS and their masters like Pakistan or other groups can manipulate them, and feed on the grievances. Ultimately, these kind of groups I have seen in other wars, like in the Philippines, in Sudan, around the world. After main peace deals are signed, there is a breakaway faction that will continue the war for another 10 years, another 5 years. Then out of them, another, it is like a Hydra-headed monster. The more you cut it, the more new organisms keep emerging. Okay. So it's that kind of a milieu. So ultimately, the solution is in good governance. And Afghans are really struggling.
I mean, that seems quite unlikely, because I mean, both the faction, let's say the present political dispensation in Afghanistan, President Ghani and Taliban are not very in good terms when this peace process is taking place.
Yeah, it is going to be a difficult coexistence. You can expect a lot of interruptions, resumptions of even fighting on a limited scale. I think even because the Taliban historically they have had a maximalist goal, throw the Americans out, retake Kabul. So that has always been their goal. Why will they share power if the Americans are out?
That's right.
Will they not take a chance and go for full-fledged complete takeover? Why will they lay down arms? Why will they demobilize? These factors remain.
Okay.
On but I think trust is an issue. Trust is an issue in this kind of conflict always.
Okay, so a lot will depend that how the situation pans out in Kabul, especially if the peace process takes place. Probably Taliban would not be happy to share the power with the present political dispensation in Kabul, as rightly put out by Professor Chaulia. Thank you very much, Professor Sreeram Chaulia, for joining and talking to us. So ISI is not very happy, and probably they think they want a complete domination in Kabul, in Afghanistan, and that is the reason that prompted them to think beyond Taliban. And these have been confirmed by the top Afghan intelligence that have revealed that the Pakistan ISI wants another armed group ready to replace Taliban in case the intra-Afghan talks succeeds under US pressure. And that will be very, we can say, interesting for the world to watch what happens in Afghanistan. That's all we have in this edition of Public Forum. Thank you very much for watching.